And welcome back. This is Module 2, Virtual Academy 70485. This is the, what is it called again?
I have no idea.
Building Store Apps.
You could actually read it from there.
Oh, this is Advanced Windows Store App Development, C# refresh. It's different, actually. That's funny.
Yeah.
So this is Windows 8.1 refresh is what we're actually doing today. This module, we're going to talk about responsive design, Darren. Responsive design. Actually, it
sounds like web.
It does. Actually, it does. And conceptually, it's almost the same. So if I'm a web developer and I want to respond to the changes in the size of the browser, because that's actually more dynamic than what can happen in Windows in a lot of ways,
Yep.
I have to use media queries inside CSS to do that. So we have the same thing inside Windows 8.1. Let's talk about our options.
Let's go for it.
All right. So responsive design we'll talk about windowing in just a second. I'd rather talk now first in the physical change of your device and my device, let's say. You have a Surface.
I do.
Very
Surface
Microsoft
Pro.
of you.
I know.
As an employee of Microsoft, I do not have Surface. That's great.
I'm branded through and through.
I would have had, they just didn't give me one, that's all.
Yeah.
What were we talking about? Oh, devices. All right, so your device and my device, both may be, for example, a 10-inch display, but I may only have a small resolution of something very basic, like 1366 by 768.
Yep.
And you have the same size dimension-wise, but your
mine's
resolution
1080p.
can be fantastic, a 1080p resolution. And what happens is I can look at an image that is even at full screen, and it looks great on my screen. I mean, it just looks beautiful. You look at it on your screen with this excellent resolution, it doesn't look as great. You start seeing artifacts and little damaged pieces and blocking that I wouldn't have
Depending
seen.
what's happened, if I'm viewing it at the same pixel dimensions as you,
Yes.
then it's going to appear a lot smaller, which
that's
isn't
true.
useful.
Right.
Or if I blow it up so it appears to be the same size as it does on yours,
Yeah.
then I see all these artifacts, as you mentioned. It gets pixelated or whatever.
Yesterday we were talking about resolution independence inside Windows 8. And
Yep.
the idea is if a developer goes in and they create a rectangle or a button, the button's a better example, a button that's 2 inches by 2 inches. So, they'd have to figure out what 2 inches is in a pixel, in a unit measurement. It's not
Yes.
pixels. So they make it 2 inches by 2 inches on my device, and they put it on any other device. Windows 8 will guarantee that the physical size, as long as it's a new device that actually communicates to Windows 8,
Yep.
that the physical size of that 2 inch by 2 inch button is always 2 inches by 2 inches. And
Yeah.
that's really important for, say, touch targets, because if you get too small on your really high resolution device,
Yep.
suddenly you've got to use
Your mark one
thin-
finger isn't quite as good. And you mentioned communicating. So basically what we need or the system needs to understand is the physical dimensions of your device and the resolution. So it can calculate how many dots per inch, and from there factor on how much something needs to be scaled to achieve the same apparent physical dimensions on your screen.
Certainly nothing a developer has to think about. This is the operating system talking to the monitor.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first idea of scaling, and it keeps things at the same physical size. But then, so let's just go with full screen still. So it is full screen on mine. It is full screen on yours. It looks great on mine because I have a low resolution device, and it looks bad on yours because you're able to see the flaws in the image.
Yep.
Now, what can we do as developers to make sure that our application, running on different devices that have different resolutions, still look beautiful? Because I want it to look great on mine, and I love that I can give an application a low memory footprint with these lower end images.
Yep.
But I don't want that to happen on your device. I want it to look great for you as well. What are our options as far as scaling? So here, let's jump to the slide for a second because I want to show two things. One is two devices that have the exact same physical size but different resolutions. And you can see that the one on the right looks so much better than the one on the left. This is accomplished using scaling, which is really just a series of conventions. But insofar as images, how will we do it?
So basically, in our UI, if we're looking at the example that's on the screen here, we're really talking about a test.jpg. And we're placing and positioning test.jpg and supplying its dimensions and its locations on the screen and so on. The system has the ability based upon its understanding of the DPI of the device to determine whether it needs to scale up or scale down that image.
Yeah.
We can use a convention, a naming convention, as illustrated here, scale-100, scale-140, scale-180, to supply differing size bitmaps that contain, they appear larger. They're effectively 1.4 times the size and 1.8 times the size of the 100 image, that the system can dynamically select based upon the scaling factor it's applying to the UI, and choose the most appropriate image to give a much better presentation of that image on these different devices.
We have a demo here, but I want to show it. We don't even have to run it to really make the point. You've gone in and set up a splash screen for this application. Mm-hmm. And what's cool is you followed the conventions here. So it's splash screen, and then in between that dot scale-100, 140, and 180. So 100 is going to be the low end. Mm-hmm. 180 is going to be the absolute best, and 140 right there in the middle. So
yes.
if you went to a 2 billion by 1 billion monitor, they're never going to go past 180. Now, how does it pick between the two? That's completely done by the operating system. Mm-hmm. And so I have an image right here in the middle of the screen, and it points out to the splash screen image. And what's cool, I think, to tell developers is I'm not picking the splash screen scale size here,
yes.
right? If you look at the source of that image, it says splash screen.png, which actually doesn't even match to an image in that folder.
Exactly.
That really shows the underlying platform is doing it for you. Mm-hmm. And if I were to jump to the properties of this image and go down to select it, I don't see all the other scales either. It's doing it for me right here. And I can use the device panel right here, and I can simulate better devices than the one I'm even on. So right now, it's, let me drop down. I can see there's 3 right here. So I can go all the way down to the 1366 by 768. That's 100% scale. And you can see that we've made a little number, a little 100 right in the middle of the image.
Obviously, you wouldn't do this to your own images to differentiate them, but
your device totally sucks.
Yeah, exactly.
But the operating system would let them know.
Yeah, upgrade.
And as we change it, you can see physically it's staying the same size.
Yes.
We've set it to be a width of 600. So proportionally speaking, it's always a width of 600. It doesn't have to be. We can allow it to grow and shrink just by taking that off. And anyway, so here I go. You can see right here in the it's not the simulator, in this device panel. The first one says 100% right on it, and so I'll select 100% 1366 by 768. You can see it swaps automatically. I can go up to 140 right here. This is 1920 by 1080, and it goes up to 140. You can see it right here, and then I can go all the way up to a really nice 10.6 that has 2560 by 1440, and then, so it jumps right up and says. It says 180 there, so it might not be the smart. It might be the smartest thing you could do to constrain the size so that it fits where you expect it to go. Mm-hmm. But you might also let it just go ahead and grow and shrink the way you want to as well. Kind of depends on your application.
And there's an alternative convention that we can use for naming these resources. Right now, we're using the inserting scale-100.
Yeah.
We can also create folders named for each of those scales and place our resources inside there as well.
Yep. If I was a designer and I was working with a folder, I would be tempted to use this one the most.
Yes.
And again, you said this yesterday, and it's still true, that the operating system will scale it automatically if you don't provide these.
Yes.
But if you're a designer and you care about every pixel, you may not be satisfied with the resulting image. It may be satisfactory, but it may not be ideal. And so this gives you the opportunity to go in and pick everything that you want and make it just the way you like it.
Yeah, and it was kind of the things that we were talking about in the design guidelines in the previous day on Essentials. We're talking about, pride and craftsmanship.
Yeah.
Really trying to get that polish in your application. These are the things that just make that little bit of difference, ensuring the experience is great across all of the range of devices that can be running your applications.
Yep, that's exactly right. Beautiful. Everything else, by the way, is all vector-based inside XAML. So as you are looking at other types of scaling, and this little image really demonstrates it, the STA for the start looks beautiful because the operating system does it for you. It's up to you to do all of these bitmap images that it doesn't have any way to really know what you want otherwise.
And to a certain extent, that may be a really good sort of rule of thumb is, we're trying to move away from all of the Chrome.
Yeah.
So a lot of, excuse me, a lot of the more traditional interfaces used to have a lot of bitmaps for all of the boxes and everything that contained
Rounded
them.
corners.
Rounded corners, drop shadows, and so on were illusions created by bitmaps.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to take that into this scalable world, just think of all the assets and resources you've got to create. That's why the web's moved away from that and moving to a much cleaner look and feel with Bootstrap and those kind of environments. Same thing we're striving for here.
Completely, yeah. That's exactly right. We take away all the things that make it look ugly, and you can still work really hard to make it look ugly. You don't have to work hard.
No.
It's kind of
For some, it's an innate ability.
That's right. They can do it with their eyes closed, and
Indeed.
sometimes you wonder if they are. Okay, so now I'm holding the new Silver
Did you
Surface
show the
2.
windowing slide?
Let's talk about windowing, shall we?
Windowing, yes.
Windowing has changed in Windows 8. It used to be that we only had 2 windows to go with. We had the primary window, which could be full screen or almost full screen. And then we had the very narrow window of the snap view.
Yes.
So it was either snapped or not is the best way to
Yep.
kind of summarize it, and that is gone.
And now basically it's not.
Yeah, now it's not snapped.
Indeed.
That's right. So you can have an application that's full screen, that's 1366 by 768, or fits on your screen. That's portrait if it is, but also one that can be half the size. So let me actually just drag this one and show you. So here I'm taking, let me do it with it. There we are. I'll pull up, none of these that I should pull up, I'm sure. But here, I can go 50-50. This wasn't an option, right? This is a big deal that everybody seems to want to have a 50-50. But I can also do variations as well, grabbing the bar in the middle, making it so that I can have it a little bit more, a little bit less. Be careful
This is
where
what
you
happens
tap.
when you have PowerPoint full screen.
That's what it is, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
PowerPoint full screen doing it to me. And but the smallest, well, let me back up. In Windows 8.0, your application had to support 320 pixels wide. That's not true. Now, in Windows 8.1, your application must support 500 pixels wide as a minimum. 500 is nice. It's a little bit bigger, and it actually kind of gives you the option now to not have to reorient the panning direction or anything significant, as long as you just test it first.
Exactly, and you need. There's no point if all of your elements are wider than 500. If you create say for example, we're talking about a hub control, and all your hub sections are set to be 650 wide, then that's just not going to work. You need to rethink your
It'll
design.
never fit in 500. You can guarantee they're always passed.
Exactly. So think of 500 to a certain extent as the new snap view. It's a mandatory element that you must consider being able to size your application down to 500.
Some developers or some applications might feel that once they get to 500 or maybe 600, it is better to go vertical instead of going horizontal. What do we say to them?
Do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's your freaking app. Do what's right.
Yep. Exactly.
Now, some developers fell in love with the snap view. 320 pixels was nice and narrow, clean. They loved it. That's out of reach for them? No.
No. You can basically elect to continue to support 320.
That's right. Let me open up Visual Studio and show. So here's the same sample that we had. If I were to go to the manifest of this sample, and it's 12 degrees centigrade. I did centigrade for you on that.
Well, I appreciate it.
I bet you do. So right here
It's a
inside
little bit cold for a Mexican wave, though.
somebody in the chat room said that the Mexican wave was invented in San Diego. So you guys can arm wrestle over that later.
That's right.
Here's
He's just
where you
wrong.
can set the minimum weight. So when it's not set or it goes to the default, then the minimum width of your application is 500 pixels. But I could manually then go in and prefer 320. If I don't, by the way, then they can never resize it down past that 500, and Windows sort of protects me from looking goofy,
Yep.
which is nice.
Because you need that help.
If I could only apply that to the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's what's changed in windowing, as well as the opportunity to have your application next to more than just one. Right now that it can be 500 or 320 pixels, I could have 4 side by side if the resolution of my monitor supported it.
Absolutely.
So in this slide, we can see that there's 3 applications side by side. The very narrow scientific calculator, and then weather and a browser is open as well.
Now, of course, this change has meant that a lot of the features and capabilities that were introduced as part of 8.0 to support all of these different view states and different elements, they're still there because we can still run 8.0 applications in 8.1, but they are deprecated.
They are deprecated, which means that the APIs still work, but in the next rev.
Yeah, there's no
look out.
guarantee. Yeah. Yeah, it normally means the hammer's about to fall.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's think about then the new way to check for orientation. And so in this case, here's a page, the grouped items page, which is the default in the grid application. And so there's an event that we're listening for. It's window.current.sizeChanged. And at that moment, we're going to run this, in this case, the update orientation method. Update orientation, all it does is return the state. We're not doing anything with it here. We'd have to decide in our own application what we do. And this sniffs, if you will, for all three. So it looks to see if it is first, if it is the very narrow old SnapView 320. Then it goes to determine whether or not it's landscape, and if not, it falls back to portrait. So now I can handle four, basically the vertical orientation, horizontal orientation, or my nice narrow. So that I would create three different views of my application to handle it. This may not be how you do it, right? Because you may not need to change, and you may not need to handle narrow, but this is how you'd kind of get it. Now, what's interesting is to determine portrait view, all you're really testing is whether or not the height is higher than the width. Right? There's nothing special. I could have done it with the window.current.bounds, but instead I'm using the application view, which returns that logic for me, and I didn't have to do it. So now this is how you do it. This is how you do it, right? This is the media query, like you do in the web, in a Windows 8 application.
And then you choose what you're going to do once you've determined this information.
That's right. We can't tell you what to do. In fact, remember the layout aware page in the Windows 8.0?
Had all those view states and everything created for you. A lot. I mean, whenever you just created one of those pages, it was just like lines and lines and lines of XAML before you'd even put your own content in there.
Yeah. Made me hate it.
Yeah.
But I sort of liked it as well because it did at least give me a starting point.
It gave you a prescribed way of dealing with the situation.
Well, it's all gone now.
It's all gone.
A layout aware page is no longer part of any template. And so you're going to build, I'll go back to it, you're going to build your own orientation logic every time. So most developers, I imagine, will build a little library of orientation logic. Although, look at it, it's eight lines. You might just write it.
You might even have a code snippet.
If you're paid by the hour, you'll probably just write it every time. Slowly. Typo. Gonna need some unit tests. That was cynical sounding. I didn't mean it that way. All right. So one of the great ways to handle the way that your application looks in one part or another, and I think orientation and visual states really flow together.
Tie hand in hand.
Is I could create a visual state, a single state, the way it looks when it's landscape. I could create another one the way it looks when it's portrait and narrow. So visual states seem a little complex, and I have to say most XAML developers seem to avoid visual states, not realizing the power that's there. And so we'll demo it here in just a second. But I can group visual states together like the button.
I think also one of the reasons why a lot of people avoid it is because there seems like there's a huge amount of XAML that gets created. And you also seem to be duplicating your UI for each of these different states and so on, putting lots of different changes and so on in there. And if you're not comfortable using Blend, then that can be scary.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Visual states really, I got to turn off my notifications. Visual states really, and I just did it, are easy inside Blend. And they can be animated as well. In fact, often you see less and less storyboard implementation and more visual state implementation. So if you're not using visual states in your application, it's not that you're doing it wrong, but you're probably missing out on some core functionality that's available to you. So anyway, here's the button. So the button has two groups of states. That's because it can have some of them at the same time. So look at the common group. The common group is what you would expect in a button, like normal, when nothing's going on. Hover, sort of like the CSS hover. Pressed and disabled. So a button could be in any of those states at any time. And at the same time, you look at that other group, this focus group, that has unfocused and focused. A button could be in any of those at any time as well. In fact, they could be in both of them. That's why you would group them together.
Okay, so grouping kind of serves two purposes. One, to associate related states.
Yes.
But two, also to allow a control to be in multiple states at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I could be both hovered and focused.
Okay.
And many others. I mean, just start doing it, right? It's a Punnett square. All right.
Yeah, it's a Cartesian product.
Exactly. And So you would do this on purpose, and in fact, maybe it's just better if we demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Changing your state, by the way, is you would use the Visual State Manager. That's a static class that's available to you in your code behind. It's also available to you in your view model, but that's actually weird.
Yeah.
I wouldn't probably change my state in my view model. I might bubble up the event or some sort of indicator.
I mean, there's typically, these are one of those things that are a little bit hard to do when you introduce view model, in terms of you want some action in your view model to change the state of your view.
Yeah.
And so you want to expose up some property, and then you tend to want to try and bind it. But there's actually no easy way to bind a property on your view to something that's going to change the view state.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so back to blend, right? So blend, we need some sort of action to change the state. You're exactly right. We have the go to state action that is in the behaviors library. And perhaps the easiest thing is just to sort of show that off. So I want to go back to our simple application. So here we are with our storyboard. Right? And so I'm just going to select all of it and delete it because we got the gist of that, right? I'll also delete my storyboard as well so I don't get any kind of problems. And let me zoom out just a hair so we can see the whole canvas. All right, so what I want to create first is the logic around orientation. So what I'll do is I'll fall back to Visual Studio. So I'm in Blend. I'm just going to fall back to Visual Studio and
Did you save your changes?
I did, and it detected that they were there. And so here, this is the, in fact, let me open up the XAML just to show it's one for one, right? These share with each other. It's just this green background, and I will drop to the code behind here. And I want to implement that logic that we had. So the easiest way is I'll do it in the loaded event, and I'll create a quick orientation check here. So that is, remember, it's in the window.current.size change. So I'll say window.current.size changed. So here's the event, and there's the event handler for it. Now I'll just have a quick little check against the portrait. We'll just do portrait, and we'll just do landscape here in the demo. So we'll say if application view, and I'll have to create quit using for it, or quit using to make it work. Dot get current, right?
Get for current view.
Get for current view, exactly, and then ask for its orientation property. That's an enumerable that if I were to jump to the settings for it, you can see it's the application view orientation enumerable. I'll jump to that as well.
And you're navigating there using F12?
I am, and just hitting F12 and going into the metadata that's inside the framework, and it'll give me back either portrait or landscape. So let's go back to my logic here. So if the orientation equals, in this case, let's see, wait, I need the, help me out, C# here. Application view orientation. Oops, wait a minute, I got to type it right here. So all I'm doing is asking, you know what? I'm going to use a switch statement so I don't have to have this brain damage. Why am I doing it this way? It's so much easier. Hard. No, it's totally hard. I'm going to take the value here and do a quick snippet. A snippet, by the way, that everybody owns. One of the nicest ones. With it. Yep. So here are the two possible this is so much better. Why did I do this before? There we go. And I will, let's set a property.
Script?
That's right. Why am I not doing it in the script? Let me take, I'm going to change the whole approach. I'm going to do this in a small snippeted view model. Is that all right with you?
Go for it.
All right. This will add another 6 seconds, but it'll make it so I'm a little happier about the whole thing. All right, so here we are. I'll take this away. I'm going to add a quick view model with a view model snippet, which nobody has but me. But all it does is add an empty view model and creates the bindable base, which just implements iNotify property change. And so right here, I want to create a, I don't know how I forgot, that's so obvious. Orientation is the O-R-I-E-N-T-A-T-I-O-N. Orientation is the property that will raise the event that it's changed. Then I will, inside a constructor, listen for the size change. So look, I'm just going to take the logic that I had in the previous class, move it into the constructor so I'm listening to it, and now I have current size change. So if it's landscape, I want to say this dot orientation equals let's just say L for now. You would obviously, this will make it easier for me to type. Otherwise, this dot orientation equals P. There really is no other option between landscape and portrait, so all I have to check is for landscape. And what developers often forget, at least in their first go, is to make sure that they call the orientation layout at first, because the size changed might not run at all. And so go ahead, you can just pass in null and get to that, or you can abstract it to a different type of method. So here's my view model, has a single property. When it's first constructed, it'll go ahead and wire up this event, and it'll also run the event once. And then all we're doing is setting L or P to the orientation property. Easy enough, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. Now I can go ahead, build this, and go back to Blend. So now Blend has a view model in its, let's make sure I saw that it didn't build because of this one little line. There we go. And so let me jump back to Blend again, right click, open in Blend, launches an open Blend, opens the project in Blend for me. The first thing is to assign the view model. So if you look over here, I'll go up to the page. This is a dependency property of data context. So as soon as I set this, it flows down through the hierarchy of the rest of the app. So I'll set, here's the view model. It's already parsed out the ones that are applicable here. So I'll go ahead and select it, and when I do, I'll go to the split view so you can see it. It adds what you would have added yourself, this page.data context, and then to local view model. This is referencing the class and instantiates it both in the designer and now eventually at runtime. Okay, so here's where it starts to become cool. I'll go in and say here's a rectangle. I want this rectangle right here. I also want a circle or ellipse. I'll put an ellipse right here, and then I'll copy this rectangle. So this is what we're going to say is our landscape view. This is the horizontal-oriented view of our application. I want to create another view, but in order to properly create another view of our app, I need to start thinking about the states. So I'll go to the State tab, and I can see I have no visual states set up at all. And they're easy enough to set up. I'll click the plus sign right here. It'll create our first group. I could call this orientation state group. I'll leave it called the default visual state group for now and create 2 visual states. So the first one will be the landscape, L-A-N-D-S-C-A-P-E state. And then I'll also create a portrait, P-O-R-T-R-A-I-T state. Easy enough. Now I have the 2 ready, and as I look at the 2 side by side, they're exactly identical. Just like a minute ago when we were messing with storyboards, as I go from one to another, it outlines the designer in red and indicates at the top that it's recording. And so now that I'm in landscape, there's no change, right? I can see that it's the same as base when it's not recording. And so I go to landscape, it's beautiful. Now, let's go to portrait. I need to make just a few changes. The first change is I want this circle to be right here. Now, before I make this change, I want to point out 2 quick buttons. They're right at the top here. The first one is layout property mode. The right one is render property mode. Just one module ago, we were talking about the difference between render and layout transforms. So layout transforms actually changes things like margin and things that can't be predicted. And so they aren't animated in a way that is as fluid and can't be offloaded to the GPU the same or isn't guaranteed. As long as I have this right one clicked, the render transform, it's basically saying all the changes that you do will be done as a transform. So when I moved this from the top right, or from the middle section here, down to the bottom, it did it using a translate transform to do it. And you can see if I were to show you how it did it right here in the object timeline. There's the render transform, translate X, and translate Y. Those are the 2 changes that we made, and we know that those can be beautifully animated. I'll do the exact same thing with this one, and you can see I'm kind of, it's relatively rudimentary, but this is now a vertical oriented, and if I were to go back to landscape, it's horizontally oriented. Bam and bam. So now just the switch between those 2 is all I really need to do to have it, but I want to make it graceful and cool, so I might go in and say, now this transition, the default transition between these 2 states, is a full second. And so I'll go in and let's make it a second. And so now as I go between the 2, it's going to be nice and smooth, but I don't see it in the designer until I go up to this button that says turn on transition preview, which is defaulted to off so I don't kill my experience in case the transitions are costly. In this case, they're not. And so I can see now, see how nice that is, and then I go down to portrait. Very, very nice. Now, what's going to be the trigger to cause those to change, Darren? I'm going to add behaviors And behaviors I can only do right now inside of Blend. So I'll go to my Assets tab here at the top. This is very powerful, keeping me from putting a lot of code inside my code behind and kind of declaring my relationship to my view model. Remember, the only thing in my view model is a single property right now. So I'll go ahead and click on Assets and go down to Behaviors. And the behavior that I care about right now is the data trigger behavior. We covered behaviors in exhaustive detail 2 MVAs ago. I was with Uni. He's the PM for this product, the Blend product. And so that will be available and recorded on MVA as well. So if you're like, man, he's really going through behaviors too fast.
Yep.
Well, we did an entire course on them, so you can go get more details later. So I'll go ahead and drag this data trigger. That means some property is going to change in value. I'll put it at the, I can put it anywhere. I'll put it at the page level, so the very high level. And so here's the page, and it has a, oh, I think I didn't drop it by mistake. Create a data trigger on it. There it is. So here's the data trigger, and I tell the data trigger, this is going to occur when a property changes, and the data trigger wants to know what property. So I'll go over here to the binding, and I'll say I want to bind to the orientation property of my view model. So we know that it already implements iNotify property change. So I'll go ahead and bind to it. Now it's bound. And here, when the value equals, and then we'll say L for landscape. When it equals L, then I want it to do something. And because I'm going to have 2 triggers, I'll go ahead and give it a name so I'm not confused. So this is going to be the, we'll use just L and P for now to keep it nice and small. This is the L data trigger. What do I want it to do? I want to change the state. So I'll go ahead and drag it onto it. I'll change its name so I don't get confused as well, and call it the L go-to state. This is great. This is exactly what you could have done in Code Behind, only it's nice and declarative, and you can hand this off to other developers, and it's a very repeatable pattern this way. So what do I want it to go to? It pulls down, it can see the different states, and L is for landscape. I'm going to repeat the entire process now. I'm going to add another data trigger to the page just like I did before. I'm going to rename it just like I did before, but this time to P because I want to handle the portrait change. Over in the properties, it asks what it wants to bind, which property, its orientation, and when it equals, in this case, P, then I want it to do something, and I'll drag down the go-to state right onto the P trigger, and it'll say, okay, well, which state do you want it to go to? I want it to go to portrait. There's no other changes. I didn't write any code, and it's nice and encapsulated. If I was unsatisfied with the way that this action was implemented, I can write a custom action very easily. So I want to make sure that I'll go to the devices panel. I want to make sure that this is in the simulator because I want to actually do some rotation. So now it's in the simulator. I'm going to go ahead and run this. It'll package it up just like in Visual Studio, deploy it and run it. This is now now I'm in the simulator. I'll start the simulator, which by the way is just a remote desktop into my it's just remote desktop into my my current machine. Yeah. It wait a minute, something just happened. Oh boy, it's going to be exciting. I can feel it already. All right, so here it is. Landscape is the default. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it to portrait, and when I do, it will give me a small error that is the longest error message. Hang on just a second. I'm going to read it real quick. I mean, that is serious. Oh my gosh, that is wow. Holy Moses! How am I going to do this demo with an error like that?
I would say stick to the script.
Yeah, that wasn't in the script as a reminder. It really is. I have 2 data triggers. Let's just see what happens when I am debugging it. It doesn't give me anything. All right, let's go back. I'm going to try it from Visual Studio and see if it makes a difference on that side.
Yep.
And then I'm going to have to give up. And I hate that because I can. On. By the way, the working version of this demo is in our solution, right? This is me doing it live like this. So perhaps
bring up your solution.
Could just pull open the solution just so you could see that it really does work just like this, and it's really nice. So I have it open right here. This is the orientation demo, and it goes to the simulator perfect. And so this is sort of cheating, but obviously I did something a little squirrely there.
Yeah.
So here it is. I'm just going to rotate. No changes, by the way, still using behaviors in the go-to action. And so I'll rotate it, and you can see it's doing, I made it nice and slow, so it was really dramatic. And then as I rotate it again, it does it as well. I'll be really interested in what I did wrong there, but I'm not that interested, to be honest. There's probably about 100 people who know exactly what I did wrong.
Exactly, and they will tell you.
And they will all tell me. It'll be a bug bounty.
Exactly.
It won't be a bug bounty. All right. So that is one way to handle orientation, as well as the implementation of view states. So view states allow me to set all the properties when my application looks in one perspective, set another perspective or view state, or visual state is the right word, because I don't want anybody to confuse view state the way ASP.NET does view state and stores data. It's nothing like that. This is just setting up a perspective into my app, and I can have as many as I want, and I can cycle between them in code behind, or as I did here, using my view model to trigger it, and in this case, using behaviors to listen for that trigger. And so, let me jump back to slides to make sure we get it. So that's the way to handle orientation for sure. It's going to be different for every application.
Yep.
Because you never know how it's going to do. In all reality, there's probably a 90% style that most developers are going to implement, but your app might be special. Then we also have visual states in the way that you set up those perspectives. So we're talking about reactive, what are we talking about? Not reactive.
Responsive design.
Responsive design that reacts to changes.
Exactly. And so this particular topic is stretching that a little bit
Yeah.
in terms of we wanted to discuss localization and globalization, and we thought, well, it's somewhat responsive to the environment, therefore we'll stick it in here.
That's right. It's responsive to where you are rather than to how it's oriented. That's
Exactly.
Right. So visual response, now it's going to be geographic response.
Exactly. So forgive us our stretching that.
Yeah. All right. So there's two concepts here that kind of get used interchangeably by mistake. And so let's just try and separate them so we all have the right vocabulary.
Okay.
Globalization.
Globalization, yes. Yes, indeed. So the ability...
Carry on.
Oh, no, by all means.
No, I'm taking a drink.
Okay, so globalization and localization. As we say, we always confuse them, and I'm confusing them right now.
Oh, okay. Globalization is really a mindset.
Yeah.
So as you write your application...
It's preparing your application for the ability to be able to run anywhere in the world.
That's exactly right. This is not a technology. When you're designing your application and you know it's going to go, let's say, to Norway, where everything is weird, then you're going to want to have a nice and flexible application so that the Norwegians see that weird UI that they need to feel comfortable in.
Once again, losing 10% of the audience.
That's right. As well as things like you're going to dream up metaphors. You know, how are you going to get users to process through the application?
Yeah, I mean, knocking the ball out of the park. You know, it's kind of a baseball metaphor.
Right.
You know, not necessarily something
You just
that's
lost half the audience just by saying that.
Exactly. And so using those types of analogies within the context of your application constrains the metaphor and the understanding that you're trying to impart.
Right.
So think about things in a very, very clear manner, something that tends to be somewhat ubiquitous. I.e., if you want to show a good result, a smile is universal.
Yeah. Except in Norway. Where it's a fish. You have to use a fish for some reason.
Okay.
Very salty.
Okay, I believe they would smack you with that salted fish
See what I
right
mean? And
now.
that's a smile.
Indeed.
That's what I mean by unusual. Anyway, so globalization is not a technology, just a mindset, just thinking about
It's
it.
a design
We will
approach.
never, hard code the date because dates look different in different cultures.
Yes.
We will never on and on and on. But then, how do we actually respond? That's when localization kicks in.
Yeah, localization is a series of capabilities that are built into the framework that allow us to design and develop in a specific language and then add additional language support as we roll our product out to multiple markets.
Yeah, that's right. Each technology has its own way to localize. And when we're talking about XAML, its localization technique starts with resources, basically taking those literal strings, pulling them out of your application, and putting them in a file dedicated, in one case, maybe to US English. So we would have a resource file that would have all of our literal strings in just for the English language.
Absolutely. And that way, if we're, you don't have to take every single string that's in your application to put it in there. If it's not being presented to the user, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that. But it's a great way to centralize these things, have consistent error messages, and so on. So it's a pretty good practice.
You don't need to localize your comments in your code,
Indeed.
as an example.
Indeed.
Can you imagine?
That would be a lot of work.
Comments?
Well,
What's
for some
that?
people, it would be no work whatsoever.
Done. I am using a globalized mindset.
Now, the other great thing about these Windows 8 App Store or 8.1 App Store apps is the introduction of a new capability of associating your UI elements with resources.
Yep, that's right.
You know, and we have this new XUID
That's right.
attribute.
And it's so simple. XUID looks like a regular ID or name tag, but it's intended only to specify how it's referenced in a resource file. So you can use XUID all you want. If you don't have an associated resource file, obviously it's not going to work. But it allows me to say, okay, for this example, the text block has a text value of, well, first name is sort of silly here, but it might be a header, and so I can have the header be whatever dot text in French, dot text in English, but not just dot text. That's
exactly, and that really is the key. Is you have the ability to specify other attributes. So, say for example, you know, first name in English is how many characters? 10 characters.
Yeah.
Including space. In another language, that may be 15 characters. So,
in Norwegian, I'm not even sure they have that word actually.
Okay. So we may need to actually change the layout of our UI as well as just change the strings. So the width of the text box could be changed based upon that language orientation.
So you may build a nice responsive UI that can get bigger, and even then it can't fit whatever language it's going to be. And so this allows you to even dial back the font size if you must in order to make it so that it can fit in that other language. So in language B, not only can you change it, but then you can also influence any other property necessary to make it applicable, including right to left, left to right.
Exactly. You know, and those are decisions you've obviously got to make right from the outset of how you build out your application and your design your UI. So why don't you flick over to My Environment and let's actually look a little bit of that localization.
Cool. All right.
So what we've got right now is a little application that, again, you'll have available to download at xaml.coplex.com once we've completed the course and we've uploaded this content.
Yeah.
And this localization demo is kind of set up to leverage a strings resource file. So what we have is, excuse me, a convention that says we create a folder called strings. And then we create a subfolder that is named for the locale in which we're actually creating our resources. Okay. So we're in US, and US allegedly speaks English. And so we are creating a folder where we're placing a string resource file. And if we look on the
So that's just a convention.
That's a convention, and that allows the system to understand where these things are and to leverage it correctly in the UI.
And that EN-US is a convention you see everywhere.
Yes.
That's a well-established moniker that indicates English US.
English US variant.
And there's hundreds of them.
There are. Many, many. So anyway, what we have on the left-hand side here is the resource file itself that shows, again, the convention that Jerry was talking about. So I have a name and the property is being set to these various values. If I now open up mainpage.xaml, what we see here is, again, a high-quality UI that many people labeled over for days. And we have our reference, XUID first name label. And we look in the resources file, we have first name label.txt. Now, one of the interesting things is these resources are not populated dynamically during design time.
Okay, because I see you have the text hard-coded.
Yes, and that is only used during our design time experience and will be replaced when we actually execute the application.
Okay.
So that's an interesting rule of thumb that if we don't have that, we don't see anything.
So that's just, it now has become just design time data or design time values.
Absolutely.
Tell me, if and you're headed towards this, I know, but how does Windows know what language you're speaking?
So every system is set up by default to have a default locale, a default language set. That's normally specified during the installation of the operating system. And those environmental settings carry over into the App Store environment. And each of your applications runs in this context. And so we have the concept of a current culture, which is applicable to the environment in which we're running, but we have the ability to change these things. And we have some tools available to us, and I've set one up that is a little bit of foreshadowing on it, what we're going to do in a little moment, that allows us to specify what our current language is.
To be clear, Windows can only have one region at a time. Is that right? I mean, as the active current culture.
you can only be active in one current culture. You can have a number of cultures that are installed, and you can switch between them, and I'll be showing how to do that.
Okay.
But that is, in fact, the truth. Yes, it can only be showing English, or it can only be showing French. It can't be mixing and matching those things together, because that would be really confusing, I think.
Now, I have seen developers implement what you're about to show, and they do it in code behind instead. And the reason they do it in code behind is they're manually attempting to switch the language to be different than the language that they have, that Windows is defaulted to.
Yes.
So you have two. So I might be looking at it in, let's say, Norwegian is what Windows is set up as. I go into my application, and I prefer it to be in English.
Yep.
I am only in Norwegian because that's what is set up by my administrator, let's say.
Oh, and equally you would do that as well if you weren't using resources at all. You just hard-coded the language and that was it. You get what you've been shipped.
Okay.
So this is going to show how we can leverage some additional tools to help us deal with internationalization and localization. So I'm going to run up this application and you're going to see it in its default configuration.
Okay. Which is English.
Which is English US, yes. And so we see first name, last name, age. We also see one of the new controls in 8.1, the date time picker.
Yeah, that's nice.
So we have the months, and we have the arrangement such that it makes sense in the English US.
Right. Month, day, year. That's the way I like it.
Yeah. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to transition to a different language preferences. And so I have installed French France as a variant, and I'm going to move it up. So that's now our primary language.
Okay, so you've just changed to primary in Windows. It has nothing to do with the store so far.
Yep.
This is what you're doing in Windows.
Now if I run up my environment, nothing changes.
Your demo's broken.
My demo is not. What I haven't supplied is any resources for this language.
Ah, I see. Okay.
So if I now close down my application, now I can introduce how I can add the additional resources, and I do this so that my keyboard isn't jacked up. You always have to remember to change it back.
The French are always typing with their hands on the opposite side of the keyboard.
You
It's
really
weird.
shouldn't leave the country. You realize this. So we have a great tool that's available to us. It is the Multilingual App Toolkit, and it leverages the Bing translation services to actually provide the ability to automatically translate language from one to another.
Now, I see it's integrated in your menu, but you did have to download it and
Yes,
install
it's an extension to Visual Studio that you can download and install the tool. And
Tools extensions, get
Yep.
it there? Okay, got it.
And also, we actually have it available. It's actually a download that you have to go to the Multilingual App Toolkit site. We'll have a link to that out on xaml.coblex.com so that you can install that and use that.
So you were about to show the first gotcha. The first gotcha is in that tool menu.
Yes, because in the Tools menu, you need to ensure that you have enabled the Multilingual App Toolkit within the context of your application.
Got it.
If you don't do that, it no worky. The next thing you can do, that would be the technical term.
We're going to need to localize that.
Exactly. Next thing we can do is if we right-click on our project, we can add translation languages.
So that's a menu item that appeared because you've enabled it.
Yep. And so now we get a list of available translation languages. The pseudo language is kind of the basic language file that's used for the generation of all the other languages. So we add that.
It's kind of the lorem ipsum that just shows a bunch of junk so you can test the layout of your UI.
Exactly. But we're also going to add French France. So that's an additional language.
It sounds like French fries every time you say it. It's so funny.
It's quality entertainment, huh? Now what we can see, excuse me, is an additional folder has been added to our project.
I see that.
And we have two files, XLF files.
Now, XLF is a special type of file intended specifically for translation. And so you might be doing all the translation yourself because you speak a lot of different languages.
Yep.
But you might actually be leveraging a professional service. Those services know XLF files. And you can take this, send it off to them, and they can bring it back to you and fully translate it professionally.
Absolutely.
But a very, very expensive app or something that you're really investing in might be worth a professional service.
And this comes back to what we were talking about before. If we've got some complex term of art that we're throwing in there, highly likely that Bing Translation Service is not going to do a fabulous job of translating that into your target language. You're going to want a native language speaker to really take a look over that. And this XLF format facilitates that. We also have the tooling that gets installed with us. and I can right-click on this and say Edit with the Multilingual Editor. I could also usually double-click on that within Visual Studio, but for some reason I've lost the association, so that tool didn't open.
Of course you did.
Because why? We're live and streaming.
Well, let me pause for a second because I think this is important. You added French France, but it's still in English.
Exactly the point I was about to make. That unless we actually run the translation tool, it will not change these elements.
I got it.
We have the ability to select individual lines on here and hit translate, such as last name. If I hit translate, it will reach out to the Bing translation service at the speed of web.
I have never seen it take that long.
I know. You know time's running against you when this happens. So as we can see, it has taken last name and translated it to nom, and that's made available. We could also turn around and say, I don't want an element to be translatable.
Some items just should not be translated.
Yeah, Microsoft, for example,
Yeah,
it's ubiquitous. Everybody understands it. You wouldn't say Microsoft.
You would not. You might. You might say it that way. Yeah.
So anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tell it to translate all.
Got it. This is also the UI you would use if you were interacting with a professional.
Yes, because we have these states we can track that says needs review,
Yep.
has been final review, signed off, and so on and so forth.
And a professional translator knows a UI like this. They may not use this tool, but they have one like it.
Correct. So I'm going to save that. If I come back into Visual Studio and open up my French localization XLF file, what I now see is the state has moved to translated. It's a suggestion that indicates that it's an automatic service has suggested that the translation is non. We haven't verified it with the language speaker or whatever and moved it to a final state. But we can see that we now have those entries for each of these various elements.
Do verify. I mean,
Yes.
I mean,
Please do.
you could mistakenly insult all the Norwegians.
Exactly. By assuming
imagine.
that fish means smile, yes. So now what I'm doing is I'm moving French France up to be my primary language.
Okay.
So now if I run the application,
All right.
what we see is it is
Nice.
now pulled in the French resources instead of the English resources. I haven't changed a single line of code to do that. What we can also see is the date time picker honors the new date format.
Yeah.
So instead of the month being first, which is patently ridiculous, it now has the day first.
Do you like the day first?
It makes perfect sense.
I guess if you think
Level
about
of
the order,
granularity.
yeah, I can see.
So we have the day, now we have the months, again expressed in the international format, and the year.
That is cool. Now you could keep going, right? You could say another,
Keep adding other languages, Japanese, anything that is supported by the tool. And if you're building an application you want to have this sort of broad reach on,
Yeah.
why not take the time to do this?
Yeah.
Even if you can't necessarily afford a professional translation service to do it, why place an impediment in the way of our international friends leveraging the application you've developed?
That's right. I mean, and if you do have to publish your app without having a professional translator, just monitor your feedback because you'll probably get some corrections.
Yeah, yes.
All right, let's look back at the module we just went through. All right? We talked
Absolutely.
about a lot of things. We talked first about the idea of resolution independence inside Windows 8 so that it handles keeping the physical size of all of your objects the same across different monitors and different displays, regardless of how large or small those are. So if you have a 2-inch by 2-inch button, it's always going to be 2 inches by 2 inches. And also the changes in windowing. The windowing in Windows 8 had that snap view, but that's gone. Now we have a required minimum of only 500 pixels. We can still elect to go down to that 320.
Yep.
And you can be side by side, you can be portrait, and all these other things that you get to handle yourself now that we've removed the layout aware page. And we showed a simple way to do that by using visual states to define the way your UI looks depending on the perspective that you're looking at it in. And I did a quick demo and then cheated to go over to the one that actually worked.
It did.
And your demo, which worked great, is the multilingual toolkit.
Yeah,
where I
really
can go in.
proved that you've got no excuse for not at least
Oh, my
attempting
goodness.
to support
That's
international languages.
Yeah, and make sure that you're using the XUID and thinking about this in advance. You demonstrated localization, but we also talked about globalization, and that's the idea of writing an app with localization in mind.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back and talk about branding and monetization?
Okay, it's going to be real. See you in
good.
10 minutes.
you.